I am 75 years old, and a few months ago I thought my mind was no longer the same. It wasn't something that happened suddenly, like a blow. It was more like a gentle but constant fog that began to cover my days. I would be in the middle of a conversation and suddenly forget what I was going to say. I'd stare at the open refrigerator door without knowing why I had opened it. There were days when I'd just look at a word, trying to remember why it felt so familiar. At first I laughed. I thought it was part of aging, that these things happen to everyone. But over time, the laughter turned into discomfort, then embarrassment, and finally, worry. It wasn't just losing words, it was losing little pieces of myself. Forgetting the name of my neighbor's son, falling silent when someone asked me to tell a story I used to share with enthusiasm. I became quieter, more insecure, and more locked in my own silence. Until one day, something as simple as a change in my breakfast brought back clarity. It wasn't a miracle pill. It wasn't some strange therapy. It was an everyday decision, paying attention to what I was eating and giving my body something it had ignored for years. What happened next wasn't immediate, but it was powerful. Today I want to tell you that story calmly, truthfully, and with the deep hope that maybe, if you are feeling what I felt, this might help you too. But before I continue, let me get to know you a little. How old are you? And from which country are you listening to me? The moment I noticed my memory was failing. The first time I noticed was with something as simple as keys. I had them in my hand. I was about to go buy bread, and without realizing it, I started looking for them all over the house. Drawers, pockets, the table, even the fridge. They were there, in my palm, but my mind was somewhere else. I laughed. "What a head I have," I said aloud, trying to brush it off. But deep down, something sparked, a little alarm. Then came the names. People I had known all my life. Neighbors' children, nephews, the clinic doctor. The names were on the tip of my tongue, but they wouldn't come out. I stared at them with a tight smile, hoping no one would notice. And if they did, they covered it with respect. But I noticed. One day I forgot an appointment with my granddaughter. We had agreed to meet at a cafe near home. She arrived, waited, and when I didn't show up, she called me. I was at home, reading the newspaper, completely unaware. When I answered and heard her disappointed voice, something inside me broke. I locked myself in the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I wondered if this was the beginning of the end, if what I was losing wasn't just memory, but a part of myself. I wasn't always like this. I used to have a sharp memory. I remembered birthdays, anecdotes from decades ago, exact dates. I could tell stories with so much detail people thought I had lived them the day before. My children began to notice it too. They didn't ask me so many questions anymore. Sometimes when I told something, they exchanged brief glances. They didn't say anything, but in their silence, there was a gesture of concern. They didn't tell me directly, but I felt it. It was like they expected one day I would forget their names. And the worst wasn't forgetting. The worst was feeling less like myself, as if every little forgetfulness took away a brick from the house that I am. And one day, that house could collapse. It was then, with that dull unease growing inside me, that I decided to look for a way out. What I tried before, and what didn't work. I didn't sit with my arms crossed. When I started noticing my mind wasn't responding like before, I looked for solutions. I didn't want to give up so quickly. I thought maybe with a bit of effort, that fog covering my head would begin to clear. I bought books of mental exercises, the kind that promise to keep your mind young. Crosswords, word searches, puzzles. At first I was enthusiastic. Every morning I would sit with a coffee and pencil in hand, determined to train my brain like going to the gym. But it didn't take long before those exercises stopped feeling like a game and started feeling like a punishment. Some mornings I'd read a clue, and the answer slipped away like smoke. I'd turn the page, try again, and in the end, close the book with a mix of frustration and sadness. I also tried pills. Some were recommended by acquaintances, Others I saw on TV. Bottles promising clarity, energy, focus. I took them for weeks, following instructions, hoping for that boost that would bring back mental agility. Yes, there were days when I seemed a bit better. Days when I remembered where I put my glasses without searching the whole house. But the fog stayed. It didn't go away. It only thinned sometimes. Then it came back stronger. And then came the thoughts no one wants to have but appear without permission. Maybe this is how it is in old age, I told myself one night while taking off my shoes. Maybe this is the price of getting old, watching your mind fade little by little. I didn't say it with dramatic sadness. I said it with that silent resignation many elders carry inside. The kind we don't share because we feel it's pointless. But deep down, something inside me resisted. A small voice, very quiet, told me maybe it wasn't inevitable. That maybe there was something more I could try, something not found in a pill or a crossword page. And that voice led me, unknowingly, to the simplest and most effective change. The unexpected advice from an old friend. One day, when I was already getting used to living with my forgetfulness, the phone rang. It wasn't a known number, but I answered anyway. On the other side, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in decades. It was Clara, a youth friend, one of those you remember with a smile and a bit of nostalgia. We had lost contact years ago, but for some reason, she thought of me and decided to call. We talked for a long while, catching up. We spoke about life, grandchildren, and ailments. And in the middle of it, without me saying anything, she told me something that caught my attention. You know, Antonio, some time ago I started feeling my memory was playing tricks on me. I thought it was the beginning of the end, but it turns out it wasn't as inevitable as I thought. I asked what she had done, and then, with the naturalness of someone who isn't trying to sell you anything, she told me something that made me think. I just changed what I ate, nothing more, she said. I started including more protein at breakfast, and every day I take something with prebiotics. You wouldn't believe how much it helped me. I didn't know what to say. The first thing I thought was that it was a coincidence, one of those good streaks we all have sometimes. But Clara didn't sound like someone easily impressed. And there was something in her voice, a calm certainty, that made me mentally take note of what she said. They aren't strange supplements or impossible diets, she added. They are simple things, Antonio. Things anyone can do without losing themselves. That conversation stayed with me for days. I didn't rush to change my diet or start hunting for exotic foods, but I began to observe more, to read a little, to listen to my body with more attention. And although I didn't know it yet, that call had been the seed of a much bigger change. A change that would begin with something as everyday as what I put on my plate in the mornings. What I discovered about the brain and the intestines. After that call with Clara, I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. The idea that a change in food could affect my memory seemed curious, a bit naive even, but also intriguing. So, like a stubborn, curious person, I started researching on my own, not with big books or impossible-to-understand scientific articles, but with simple things, videos, talks, conversations with my grandson, who, by the way, studies nutrition. And what I found surprised me more than I expected. It turns out that the brain and the gut have a much deeper relationship than we think. It's not just that one feeds the other. They communicate all the time. There's a real physical connection through something scientists call the gut-brain axis. I discovered, for example, that in the gut lives something called microbiota, millions and millions of microorganisms that influence our digestion, our defenses, and also our mood and mind. It was hard to believe, but it was true. Some of those little creatures, as I call them, help produce substances that directly affect the brain. One of them is serotonin, the so-called happiness hormone, which influences how we sleep, how we feel, and yes, also how we remember. I never thought what I ate could affect what I thought. I never imagined that an inflamed, weak, or neglected gut could translate into a slow, confused, or foggy mind. But when I started looking back, Everything began to make sense. Over the past years, my diet had been repetitive, quick, and without much real value. White bread, reheated coffee, something fried at midday. How could I expect my mind to stay strong if I didn't give it good foundations? I understood then. The brain doesn't live on ideas alone. It also lives on what we eat. And if I wanted to recover clarity, mental exercises weren't enough. I had to start where almost no one looks: the stomach. How I changed my breakfast and dinner, my daily routine. After understanding the connection between my gut and memory, I knew I had to start with the basics: what I ate when I woke up and before going to bed. It wasn't about following a strange diet or spending money on imported supplements. I just needed to review my habits and make small, consistent changes. I started with breakfast. For years, my routine was toasted white bread with butter, a black coffee, and sometimes something sweet. Quick, convenient, and I admit, tasty. But it gave me none of what my mind needed. So little by little, without complicating my life, I began including natural sources of protein. One day, I made a hard-boiled egg. Another, I added natural yogurt with oats. When I had time, I prepared cooked lentils from the day before and combined them with a bit of brown rice. I even discovered that a handful of nuts could make a big difference. The important thing was variety, but maintaining the essential, giving my body the protein it needed to regenerate, stay firm, and nourish that brain I felt slower every day. Then came the prebiotics. I didn't know them by name, but I had eaten many of them during childhood. Ripe banana, cooked oats, steamed asparagus, cooked onion. These foods help feed the good microorganisms living in our gut. I didn't need a special store or to buy capsules with strange names. I just had to look carefully at the neighborhood market and choose with intention. Sometimes at night, instead of a heavy dinner, I opted for a bowl of yogurt with chopped banana and a bit of oats, or a vegetable cream soup with onion and a touch of olive oil. It was simple, comforting, and without knowing it, I was feeding more than just my stomach. It wasn't a sudden change. I didn't become a different man overnight, but that new routine began to give me a sense of control, of care, as if by choosing what I ate, I was also choosing how I wanted to age. And in that daily, simple and human gesture, something unexpected began. What happened in the first week? I didn't expect miracles. When you reach a certain age, you learn not to get your hopes up too fast. But after a few days of changing my breakfasts and dinners, I started noticing something different. Not something spectacular, nothing I could present as scientific proof, but something deeply human. The first sign was in the morning. I used to wake up with a heavy head, as if I had slept inside a cloud. I'd sit at the edge of the bed and take a few minutes to remember what day it was. But on the third or fourth day of this new routine, I got up and felt light, more awake, more present. I still forgot things, yes. I won't lie. I still looked for my glasses only to find them hanging on my shirt. I still hesitated when recalling a name or date. But something was different. I felt more connected to what was happening around me, as if instead of rowing against the current, I could just let myself go with the river. That week, I recovered a couple of habits I had left behind a long time ago. One morning, without thinking, I sat in front of my old hard-covered notebook and wrote a page. It wasn't anything extraordinary, a reflection, a memory, a list of thoughts. But when I finished, I realized I hadn't written calmly for months, maybe years. I also went back to reading. Not the quick reading of headlines and news that are forgotten instantly, but real reading. I sat with a book, without distractions, and turned the pages attentively. And the strangest thing, the next day, I remembered what I had read. Not everything, of course, but the essentials, like before. Another strange thing happened when I woke up. I remembered a dream. It had been a long time since that happened. And it wasn't just a vague image, but a full dream, with details, dialogues, and a clear feeling. I woke up with that story in my head and a smile on my face. It may sound insignificant to some, but for me, it was like recovering parts of myself I thought were lost. And it all had started with something as simple as replacing bread with hot oats and a boiled egg. The fog was still there, but for the first time, cracks appeared through which light filtered in. What I noticed in the second and third weeks. The second week brought something I didn't expect: consistency. It wasn't isolated moments of lucidity like at the beginning. Now there were whole days when I felt my mind belonged to me again. Not completely, not like before, but enough to trust it again. I started remembering names. Not all, of course. But I no longer blanked out in front of familiar faces. I greeted by name the lady at the market, the one who's been selling me bananas for years. I remembered the name of the neighbor's grandson next door, and when I said it out loud, they looked at me with surprise. I also told stories again without losing my way halfway. Stories I had shared 1,000 times but lately found hard to piece together. Now they came out whole, with details, emotion, and that rhythm I used to have. It was as if the words had been there all along, waiting for the moment to come back. One afternoon, while we talked at the table, my daughter looked at me with some attention. She smiled and said, almost without thinking, "Dad, you've been more awake lately." That phrase stuck in my chest. Not because she thought I was asleep before, but because she noticed something. She saw it. It wasn't just my feeling. My change was starting to reflect in other people's eyes. And with that, something equally important began to grow: my confidence. I offered to help with things I used to avoid for fear of making mistakes. I dared to express opinions more, tell stories, call on the phone without writing down what I was going to say. Small things, yes, but huge in dignity. I felt more myself, more whole, more secure, and all without medication, magic formulas, or big sacrifices, just with real food, mindful attention, and the will to keep taking care of myself. It wasn't a miracle. It was like a fog that cleared a little every day, as if my mind, instead of being asleep, had been waiting for food, care, and patience. Changes I made beyond food. Although it all started with breakfast and dinner, soon I realized that small change was contagious. It was as if by beginning to care about what I ate, something inside me activated, like an old clock that starts ticking again. And little by little, without forcing myself, I made other changes. The first was moving more. I'm not talking about exercising like a young man or joining a gym. I mean something simpler. Walking. Going for a short stroll in the morning, even if brief. Taking the stairs instead of the elevator at home. Moving my body without hurry but with intention. At first I got tired quickly. My legs complained, my ankles creaked. But soon I noticed that not only did my body feel more agile, but so did my head. While walking, I thought more clearly. I remembered things. I organized ideas. It was like my feet were telling my brain, "Come on, wake up, we're still alive." I also started drinking more water. I never gave it much importance. Over the years, one loses the habit, and sometimes even thirst. But after reading more about how the brain needs hydration to work well, I made it part of my routine. A glass of water upon waking, another mid-morning, another in the afternoon. No obsession, but consistency. And maybe the most valuable change was sleep. I used to have trouble sleeping. I'd wake several times at night, with a restless mind or uncomfortable body. But after improving my diet and moving a bit more during the day, I started sleeping more deeply. It wasn't perfect sleep, but more restful. I slept better, and upon waking, my head was no longer a maze. I didn't have to fight with my thoughts to put them in order. Words flowed, memories didn't hide so much. And with each passing day, that clarity became more natural. It all started with food, but then it was a domino effect. One piece pushed the next. Eating better led me to walk. Walking led me to sleep better. Sleeping better helped me think more clearly, and so, without realizing it, I was rebuilding myself from the inside. And all that at 75 years old. Over time, I realized something that moved me deeply. It wasn't a sudden thought, but a truth that took shape slowly. like light filtering through a window at dawn. Older people often give up without fighting. We resign ourselves. We assume that forgetfulness, mental clumsiness, lack of energy are natural parts of an aging. "I'm not for that anymore," we say with a half smile and shoulders slumped. But behind that phrase, what really lies is fear. Fear of not being able. Fear of not being worth it. Fear that it's too late. I've seen people my age give up prematurely. Bodies that could still move but stayed still. Minds that could still dream but no longer dared. And I've also seen the opposite. People who with small gestures kept fighting to be present, to live with dignity. And the difference wasn't age, it was attitude. Not everything is under our control, of course not. There are illnesses, wear and tear, factors no one can avoid. But much more than we think depends on what we do each day. What we eat, how we move, the small decisions we repeat. Our mind ages, yes, but it can bloom if we feed it well. And I'm not only talking about physical food, also about conversations, music, silence, gratitude. But everything starts, curiously, on the plate. In that first bite of the day that decides if we are merely surviving or still living with intention. Eating, at this stage of life, is much more than nourishment. It is a way to care for oneself, to give oneself value. It is also a way to remember who you are. Because when you eat mindfully, with respect for your body and your story, what you're doing is not just feeding yourself. You're saying, "I'm still here. I still have something to give. I am still me." And that thought, so simple and so powerful, can be the beginning of a transformation. I don't know if this will work the same for everyone. I have no magic formulas, no studies to show. I only have my experience and what I felt in my body, my head, and my heart. For me, it was a rebirth. A slow, discreet rebirth, without fireworks, but a rebirth nonetheless. I recovered parts of myself I thought were lost. My attention, my memories, my inner voice. And it all started with something as simple as paying attention to what I put on my plate. I'm not telling you to do exactly what I did. I'm only inviting you to look with more care at what you eat, how you sleep, if you move enough, if you drink water, if you breathe calmly. Sometimes, those small gestures hold the biggest things: your clarity, your joy, your memory. You don't need expensive supplements or promises wrapped in shiny labels. What you often need is awareness, consistency, self-love. Old age doesn't have to be surrender. It can be a transformation. And that transformation can start today, with what you have, with who you are. After 70, it's not just about living longer, it's about not forgetting how to live. And now I ask you, have you tried anything that changed your mind or energy at this stage of life? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to read you, learn with you, and feel that even if we're far apart, we keep walking together.